Sunshine across the southeast, looking a little drier as we head towards the weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we're talking about industrial action of Felixstowe as dockers at the UK's busiest port go on strike. How long could this industrial action last? Could dock workers elsewhere strike in sympathy? And what will the impact be on British firms and shoppers? We host a detailed discussion with people who really know their stuff. On the Money, after the GB News headlines, with Bethany Elsey.
Liam, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just after 1 p.m. I am Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date on GB News. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. The Ministry of Justice says more than 6,000 court hearings have been disrupted so far. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid soaring energy bills. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has criticised Liz Truss, claiming her plans to tackle the cost of living crisis could plunge the economy into an inflation spiral. Ms Truss argues her plans will help the UK economy, but Sir Keir Starmer is urging the leadership candidates to recall Parliament to tackle the crisis.
Unless action is taken, energy bills are going to go through the roof this winter, which is why we, the Labour Party, have said we should freeze energy prices, not let those bills go up, and pay for that in part with the windfall tax on oil and gas companies are making huge, huge profits. Alongside that, we need a national mission to insulate homes. That's a longer-term issue. I called for that a year ago now. If the government had done that, we'd have the best part of 2 million homes insulated. This morning I've been seeing next-generation homes with insulation built into them. So we need to freeze prices for this winter.
Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded not guilty to a charge of fraud. He's accused of allegedly failing to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government between 2013 and 16. The 91-year-old made his first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning after being charged last month. An 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port, Felixstowe, has entered its second day. Almost 2,000 members of Unite, including crane drivers and machine operators, are walking out in a dispute over pay. It's the first strike to disrupt the port since 1989. National Officer for Docks at Unite the Union, Robert Morton, says members want a pay increase that's relative to the company's earnings.
I don't accept that it's the unions that are inflating the profits. I accept that it's the employers that are doing that by making these profits, and good luck to them. But why not share them? Our members of Unite are so angry that they are saying enough is enough. We got you through the pandemic. This is the way you treat us now. And you should be offering an increase that is relative to the company's profits.
Downing Street says the failure of water companies to adequately reduce sewage discharges is completely unacceptable. A Number 10 spokeswoman says water firms have a duty to put their customers before shareholders and that they expect urgent action or face fines. It says Environment Agency data obtained by the Liberal Democrat Party shows monitors that are used for tracking sewage being pumped into the sea are faulty or not even installed at all. They found 2,000 monitors didn't work for at least 90% of the time. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing a terrorism charge over a political speech he gave at the weekend. He's accused of threatening government officials about the alleged police torture of one of his aides. Hundreds of his supporters have gathered outside his home in the capital, Islamabad. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. Russia's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen who arrived in the country in July was behind the attack on Saturday night. Officers allege the suspect fled Russia into Estonia after Daria Dugina was killed in a car bomb on a road outside Moscow. The allegations have not yet been independently verified. Bosses at the world's second-largest cinema chain, Cineworld, are considering whether to put the firm into bankruptcy. Earlier this morning, they confirmed they're looking at options for the business, which is struggling under heavy debts. Theatres around the world will remain open as usual for now. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Liam.
Coming up on The Money today, almost 2,000 dockers at the UK's busiest port are on strike in industrial action that's set to last 8 days but could yet be extended. Felixstowe handles around half of the UK's container freight. How will these stoppages on flows of goods in and out of the country impact Britain's manufacturers, other businesses and shoppers? As ever, we hold a detailed discussion. Plus, it's the first hearing for Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone after his alleged failure to declare over £400 million of overseas assets to the tax man. Bernie Ecclestone denies all wrongdoing. Our Home Affairs editor has the latest. And public sector workers are also gearing up for strike action this autumn, with health and teaching union bosses sounding increasingly strident. But do public sector workers really get a worse deal than their private sector counterparts? A message we so often hear. Well, the numbers say precisely the opposite. And for our latest Startup Britain interview, we're talking to Ian Huntingdon, founder of Spartan Survival, providing bushcraft and survival experiences for friends, families and firms in some of the most raw and remote parts of the UK. That's later in the show. So as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On The Money? How do they impact you? Email me now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet @GBNews. And don't forget to subscribe to our GB News YouTube channel. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're on the money. Now, yesterday, Sunday, at almost 2,000 workers at the UK's busiest container port started 8 days of industrial action in the latest dispute about pay. Already, we've seen industrial action from train drivers and London Underground staff, and some bus drivers too. which has inconvenienced millions of workers and businesses. And this strike at the port of Felixstowe will do nothing to ease the supply chain disruptions that have dogged the UK economy, indeed the entire world, during and since the COVID lockdown. Getting on for half of all containers shipped into and out of Britain pass through Felixstowe port in Suffolk. We're about to enter the busiest importing period of the year for Britain, as shops build up stocks ahead of heavy consumer demand for the November Black Friday shopping season and the run-up to Christmas. The company that owns Felixstowe, CK Hutchison, has offered a 7% pay rise, plus a £500 one-off payment, which bosses say amounts to, quotes, a very fair offer indeed. The union Unite points out that the latest consumer price index data shows inflation at 10.3% in June. So union members are pushing for a 10% pay rise to keep up with the rising cost of living. Some 2,500 people work at Felixstowe Port, and around 500 or so, mainly administrative staff, have accepted the pay offer already on the table. But 1,900 members of Unite, which incorporates the old T&G and Amicus unions, they're holding out for more, having voted to strike for the first time since 1989, 9-1 in favour.
Comes next is that the employer accepts our offer to sit around the table and end this dispute. So far, they've not replied to that. If they don't come around the table, then the strike, which started yesterday, will carry on for 8 days and 8 nights. We will then appraise our position and name more strike dates.
Robert Morton there of the Unite Union. Now, if this strike action lasts only 8 days, the impact should be relatively limited, with freight diverting to other ports. But if Unite extend this industrial action at Felixstowe, or if workers at other ports come out in sympathy, this docker strike could seriously harm an already struggling UK economy. Felixstowe is only the 9th biggest port in Europe these days, with Southampton at 14th, with both way outside the world's top 50 ports, most of which are in Asia these days. Britain increasingly trades in services rather than goods after all. But if this 8-day Felixstowe strike is extended or spreads, then the fallout for distributors, retailers and other businesses, as well as shoppers, could be extremely serious. And that's our On the Money question today. How will the Felixstowe port strike impact the UK economy? Grown-up conversation with people who know their stuff. That's what we do here on The Money. I'm joined now by Kate Jennings. She's Director of Policy at Logistics UK, standing up for and representing all supply chain logistics, with members from road, rail, sea and air industries. Richard Bartlett, a supply chain expert at Clear Now, advises on how to simplify complicated global supply chain logistics. Two extremely knowledgeable people, as indeed is Helen Thomas, as ever, here in the studio, CEO at Blonde Money, friend of the show. Let's start with you, Kate. Your members must be really concerned that Britain's biggest container port has closed down for at least 8 days, with possibly more to come.
Hi, good afternoon, Liam. Good to be talking to you. I suppose the first thing to say is that the supply chain is extremely dynamic and resilient. So they will have planned for this. They will have brought, some deliveries forward. They may have pushed some back. So I'm optimistic that actually, for these 8 days, manufacturers and consumers shouldn't see the difference. It's all about communication, really, isn't it? As long as the port communicates with the hauliers and the shippers, then the supply chain will respond appropriately.
How concerned are you, Richard Bartlett? Clearly, this strike was well flagged. We knew it was coming. Clearly, Southampton is there. Other British ports that are well capable of taking up the slack for now. But if it is for now...
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to see you again, Liam. Yeah, I mean, it's not that simple just to move ports, as we know, when the large container ships are coming in. Like we've said, we are robust, they will work on this. But you've also got to consider the hauliers that are used to doing the runs, who are going in to collect the containers and deliver them. They lose a huge income. They can't just adjust and change around, particularly if they're in that area. So it has a huge effect just on them, not just the consumer, but also, the hauliers in general, who always seem to be hit at every angle. Fuel, as we've seen this year, obviously we've seen inflation going higher and higher, but it has a huge effect. Them 8 days can have a big effect on the haulage industry, who are used to doing that domestic haulage. And what I mean by that, they will collect the container from Felixstowe, from the port, and deliver it to the customer. Now, hopefully that will carry on at a small way, but as you know, the amount of containers that are coming in, it's a big speed. So yeah, we're going to see some disruption, not a huge disruption, but the worry is if this continues and continues and continues, we've got Christmas coming up, we've got lots of things to look forward to, hopefully, but obviously we're getting port delays and, people are starting to bring the containers in now. We've already had the delays in China and everywhere else. The last thing we need really, Liam, is more delays with containers and particular strikes.
Kate Jennings, let's go back to you. In the end, if it is 8 days, my impression, I've been a business journalist for longer than I care to admit, the UK supply chain is pretty robust. People like you, people like Richard Bartlett, you really know what you're doing. We're good at this stuff. On the other hand, if this strike does go beyond 8 days, if other dock workers do come out in sympathy, that's by no means beyond the realms of possibility. Surely then firms trying to get hold of components will suffer. Shoppers trying to get hold of goods will suffer in terms of both unavailability and price.
I suppose the first thing to say really is that, let's hope the unions and the employer, keep negotiating, keep talking, because the obvious, best thing to happen here is that they reach agreement and there's no further disruption. That's what we're all hoping for, isn't it? But there is, I think, as you've seen...
You are very much an industry insider. This stuff's all over. It's very much under your fingernails. You talk to... you are the umbrella group for so many different companies working in this sector. What is the mood among your members? Is Unite going to limit this to 8 days? Because they're not showing any signs of it so far.
I would say the mood amongst members is, obviously they're feeling the inflationary costs, and that's why, for example, we've asked for a reduction in fuel duty. We've asked for a further 6 pence, maybe linked to the inflation and VAT revenues. So we're trying to be practical here. We're trying to say, you've got to watch those haulier costs, and government has a role to play in managing those costs. When it comes down to a strike like this, I think we need to leave it to the employer and the unions, don't we, to do that negotiation. The industry will respond as best it can. What you hear in the industry is, I think now we've got a much more sort of just-in-case model rather than a just-in-time model. There's quite a lot of stock in the supply chain. So hopefully, we won't have any problems.
Richard, let me put this to you. I said in my opening remarks, I pointed out that Felixstowe is now only the 9th biggest port in Europe. I think Southampton is the 14th. None of them are in the top 50. Yes, they're important to us, but the UK is mostly a services economy these days. We don't really trade much in physical goods. Can't we see this out? Isn't it true that Unite, the dockers, have a lot less leverage now than they would have, say, 30 or 50 years ago?
Well, yeah, 1989 is a long time ago. Obviously, but there's still containers coming in, Liam. Let's not underestimate the value and the value of what the workers actually do at Felixstowe. Let's be clear that Felixstowe is a very, very busy port. We've been on the show, Liam, talking about the delays there. What worries me is we're running up to Christmas. And, we have more and more delays coming in, there are more strikes. That has an effect on your Christmas trade coming in, because obviously the containers are due in. It has effects on the poor hauliers who are waiting, relying on that work. They've had a tough year. They've had the pandemic. They've got the fuel rise, the fuel cost rises. There's a lot of things against them. And then ultimately the consumer wants to be able to see things on the shelves, and hopefully we'll never get to that. But we have to start planning. Government has to look at this, because we cannot afford discontent of the next few months were Unite or whichever unit is. And again, it's nothing to do with me, that side. I understand obviously why and for the reasons they're doing. But, we cannot let this get out of order, because ultimately the consumer is always the person who suffers and the hauliers are the persons who suffer. And that's key. So we've got to make sure that supply chain is working the best it can. It's supporting the logistics industry, which is very key to the UK economy. And it's also supporting the consumers, that they can buy the product, for the manufacturers, for the importers who are relying on a busy Christmas this year after a very struggling 2 years of the pandemic. So let's be very clear here. We cannot afford more strikes.
Helen Thomas, coming to you in the studio. We've heard there from two, really, supply chain insiders. This is what they do. As an economist, just pulling out slightly, what do you make of the danger that this poses to the British economy?
Well, it is potentially quite dangerous, but then, gosh, we've had so many supply chain problems, haven't we? So in a funny sort of way, we've been rolling with these punches for a long time, but the economy, to extend that metaphor, is a bit bruised and battered from it. And so, yes, while there is flexibility, and we've heard about the response, the just in case rather than just in time, there is a cost to that in the end. And as we've just heard there, it will likely end up falling on the consumer. And you know what, as I was listening to that, the only thing I could think, which is, they say economics is a gloomy science, I fear the consumer's already retrenching and won't be buying that much. So we may actually see that the demand side comes down, even as supply is. So from a pure economics perspective, that'll balance out.
I tell you what, we're just going to go to the break. It may be that hearing this news, consumers do a little bit of early Christmas shopping, but then if this has a knock-on effect and prices go up, it may be a bit more of a frugal Christmas.
Yes, well, which was on the cards for so many reasons already, as we know.
This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we keep this discussion going on British supply chains, on the impact of these Felixstowe docker stoppages on businesses and consumers. In the run-up to Christmas, we'll also be live at the Magistrates' Court as billionaire Bernie Ecclestone shows up to deny fraud charges, failing to declare £400 million worth of assets to the government. And don't forget to email in. I want to hear from you. And I'll read out some of your emails later in the show, so stay with us. You're On the Money.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We're talking about strikes in Felixstowe, an 8-day stoppage which began yesterday. Union workers are not compromising. They want a 10% pay rise. The company's only offered 7%. We're asking how this port strike at Britain's biggest container depot will affect the British economy. I'm still with my expert panel. Let me now introduce a new guest. Angus Hind is Air and Sea Director at Europa Worldwide, one of the largest transport and logistic firms in the UK, joining us from Hong Kong, no less. Angus, a late one for you. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you feel about this stoppage at Felixstowe? It's billed to be an 8-day stoppage. We can probably get around that. We knew it was coming. We've got Southampton. We've got other major ports around the UK. How about with the unions digging their heels in if that 8-day stoppage extends and indeed spreads to other ports with dockers coming out in sympathy?
Yeah. Nice to meet you, Liam. I think talking about an 8-day strike, I think an 8-day strike, the economy, the supply chain, in my opinion, can deal and work with an 8-day strike. I think if the strike goes on, I think that's when we'll see the knock-on effect to the supply chain in general, really. I mean, as the gentleman you have on said, I think the immediate impact is on the local truckers around the Felixstowe area. They do survive on a day-to-day basis with the container movements from that port. Is a trucker in the Felixstowe area going to be doing a lot of business ex-London Gateway, ex-Southampton? Possibly not. I think that is the immediate impact for me. A lot of retailers, I think, as a consumer, short term, I don't think there's any problems. I think what we're seeing now is we're now coming into the traditional peak, as we call it, within our industry, where a lot of retailers are starting to ship from the Far East into the UK and Europe for Christmas. So we'll not see those volumes probably hitting the UK, Felixstowe, Southampton, London Gateway until possibly October, middle to end of October. So I think if the strike goes on that long, I think that's when we'll see some real impact on the supply chain.
Kate Jennings of Logistics UK, let's return to you. Do you think we're too dependent on Felixstowe? I mean, almost half of our containers coming through one port. Why is that? It's not as if most people in the country live in Suffolk and Norfolk, which is where Felixstowe obviously is, in Suffolk in the east of England. We've got, obviously, that's near London, but that's nowhere near the northwest, northeast, the Midlands, other, big areas of population.
Well, this is a private sector industry, so clearly the industry has adapted to deliver, the most efficient supply chain possible. So Felixstowe is clearly very effective, and that's why they have such a large share of the market. But there are other ports. Obviously, things could go into London Gateway, they could go into Southampton. But as you say, Felixstowe is quite well placed, actually, to deliver goods into Birmingham, I suppose, in particular, which is obviously the centre of the logistics network. But I agree. I think Felixstowe's clearly done well to have that much business, but it's not the only port available.
Richard Bartlett of Clear Now, you obviously know British supply chain very, very well. What's your sense of whether or not other ports, dockers at other ports, will come out in sympathy? And if they do, what could be the implications of that?
Well, first of all, we hope it doesn't happen. There's been enough disruption, and this is certainly, I think this is a warning sign. I mean, I see this more as a warning sign from United, who are, we're seeing this happen a lot, in not just obviously in supply chain and other things. It will have an effect. Obviously, Southampton, you've got London Gateway now, which is the new terminal, which is handling a lot of cargo. You've got Liverpool, you've got a lot of docks. Even though they're smaller, they play a huge important role. Particularly a place like Liverpool, they're bringing goods in from the US. And it's like we said, it's the effect it has going down the line if other strikes start to happen, because one thing you don't want is one strike in one area and then the next week one strike in another port, then another port. So this is an area that government really need to sit down, companies need to sit down, private investors need to sit down and really work this out, because this could be another chain in the events which we've talked about a lot, as you know, Liam. This could just be, we know people are being frugal, but the last thing you need is the poor consumer, not just the consumers, but the people who are relying on selling the goods, the car parts, the other parts that are coming in from all around the world being delayed. It's the last thing we need. We're all waiting for things. I was looking at a car, just for instance, I was looking at a car recently and I was told there was a 14-month waiting list on that car because of the parts. You imagine now if you start having these delays, I'm not saying it has an effect at this moment, the 8 days, but as you start going down the chain, as Europa will know this and other freight forwards, it's very hard to plan it because you're trying to plan a delivery and then you can't plan the delivery. You've got the huge resources on the haulier who's relying on that day-to-day work. That's what worries me. It's the local haulage business that has a huge effect on them, and they can't control that, Liam. They have no control over it.
Angus Hind in Hong Kong there, Air and Sea Director at Europa Worldwide. It struck me, I'm not a supply chain expert like you three, but it struck me as an economist, these supply chain issues, these post-COVID problems with global supply chains, there was a sense they were easing a little bit. There seemed to be some light at the end of the tunnel, which, of course, this Felixstowe strike has slightly scuppered. Apart from Felixstowe, is that true? Do you feel, as a supply chain expert, that we were starting to get through the worst of the post-lockdown blockages?
Yes, I do. I think for me, being based over in Hong Kong, I think I see we have our own offices in China as well, and the guys there have had extended lockdowns. But I think once you see the lockdowns in the Far East lifting, obviously Europe's lifted already. I think we're now recovering. Yes, there is reported container shortages in Asia. A lot of European ports are congested with containers at the moment as well. But I do think there is a bit of a light at the tunnel. So, yeah, hopefully we'll see in the coming weeks that, hopefully between the unions and the workers, they do come to a compromise in some way, shape or form, and then we can see normal service resume at Felixstowe.
Helen Thomas, what we just heard from Angus Hind, that's why I think the unions have played this so shrewdly, not only going for a strike as we go into the most important importing season for retailers in the run-up to Christmas, but also at a time when the British government is desperate for some of the good news, desperate that growth comes back, desperate that we can avoid a recession, which, of course, the Bank of England is predicting. So the government will want these supply chain issues solved.
They will, yeah, and as you say, timing is everything, isn't it? Because, of course, we're in this bizarre hiatus where we have a Prime Minister but we don't really have a functioning government. When the new leader takes over, if this does run on or other ports come out in sympathy, then they've got that momentum behind them already and say, well, what are you going to do about it? So, fully understand why they're taking advantage of it. I think, given where inflation is, your favourite topic that you've talked about for a very long time now, we will be seeing more and more of these strikes in many different sectors. And the unions say CK Hutchison are a global company. They're making pretty big profits. Well, I don't know the details of it, but, they're in the end with all of this, as I was listening to that, one way or other, I think we end up with higher prices. Yeah, I think so. That is the only... Right. We're in a more inefficient world. Even if the goods get through, there's going to be more hassle. We've just heard from our three supply chain experts there, and in the end, the consumer will pay. Helen Thomas, you're staying with us, but for now, thank you so much to my supply chain expert guests, Kate Jennings of Logistics UK, Richard Bartlett. Returning to On the Money, you can see my Money Talks interview with Richard. It's on the GBNews YouTube channel from a few months ago. He is from Clear now, joining us from Greater Manchester. And from Hong Kong, we're everywhere, Angus Hind of Europa Worldwide. Angus Hind, thank you so much for joining us. Indeed, a very interesting discussion. Now, today's the first court hearing for Bernie Ecclestone. The Formula One boss has been charged with fraud for false representation over an alleged failure to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government. The 91-year-old's appearing at Westminster Magistrates Court. And GB News Home Affairs editor Mark White was there.
Well, Bernie Ecclestone arrived here at Westminster Magistrates Court shortly after 9 a.m. this morning to answer this charge of fraud against the Exchequer. In court number 1, the magistrate actually allowed him out of the dock because of hearing difficulties. So he sat in front of the glass-fronted dock. He rose to his feet to confirm his name as Bernard Charles Ecclestone, his date of birth and his address in Knightsbridge in central London. Now, the charge was put to him that over a period between 2013 and 2016, he failed to declare assets to the value of some $650 million. He was asked how he indicated in terms of his plea. He said that he would be pleading not guilty, so this matter has now been referred to the Crown Court. Mr. Ecclestone has now left. He was granted unconditional bail. He will appear again at Southwark Crown Court on the 19th of September.
Mark White there, GB News Home Affairs editor, on the tax fraud case of former Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone, who denies all charges. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, today's Start-up Britain interview is with Ian Huntingdon of Spartan Survival. He'll be telling us all about how his bushcraft and survival courses help business leaders, ex-military and families alike. That's after the GB News headlines once more with Bethany Elsey.
Liam, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 33 minutes past 1. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid soaring energy bills. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has criticised Liz Truss, claiming her plans to tackle the cost of living crisis could plunge the economy into inflation spiral. Ms Truss argues her plans will help the UK economy. Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded not guilty to a charge of fraud. He's accused of allegedly failing to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government between 2013 and 2016. The 91-year-old made his first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court after being charged last month. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. The Kremlin's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen was behind the attack. Daria Dugina was killed by a suspected car bomb on a road outside Moscow on Saturday night. The allegations have not yet been independently verified. And bosses at the world's second largest cinema chain, Cineworld, are considering whether to put the firm into bankruptcy. Earlier this month, they confirmed they're looking at options for the business, which is struggling under heavy debts. Theatres around the world will remain open as usual for now. You're watching GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. We'll get back to Liam in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
But first, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.181, and 1.80 euros, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,466 and 4 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. It's 1:37. Now, last week's wage data from the Office for National Statistics showed that average pay across the private sector rose by 5.9% over the last year, while for the fifth of the workforce who work for the state, including NHS workers, teachers and civil servants, their pay rose on average by just 1.8%. Now, that led to lots of comments in the media, particularly among broadcasters, that public sector workers are much worse off than the rest of us, with public sector union bosses likely to push for big pay rises this autumn and winter, which could disrupt schools and hospitals, among other vital services. The reality is, though, despite what you hear, when you really drill down into the data, public sector workers on average are paid more than across the private sector, and that's been the case for decades. The average weekly public sector wage in 2021 was £579, but just £536 in the private sector, with state workers' wages around 8% higher, as this graph makes clear for those of you watching on television. On top of that, of course, public sector workers often get more holidays, far better job security and other conditions, and of course those generous final salary pensions. Now, don't get me wrong. NHS workers and other hard-working frontline state staff do, in my view, deserve decent pay rises that reflect inflation. But NHS managers, GPs doing fewer face-to-face consultations and others in cushy civil service jobs now working from home? Really? I'm joined now by Harry Phone. He's campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, campaigning for responsible spending of our taxes. And with me still, I can't get rid of her, it's Helen Thomas, CEO of Blonde Money, in the studio. Harry, I'll tell you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put a counterfactual here. I would, public sector workers, they do a great job. If we didn't have the public sector, then the private sector couldn't do what they do, couldn't create wealth. They deserve big pay rises in line with inflation. What say you?
Well, of course, we need to remember that the public sector cannot exist without the private sector. And whilst you're right to mention that, there has been this narrowing recently in the difference between the people in the public sector are still far outperforming in terms of average weekly earnings those in the private sector. And, we have a situation now where the tax burden is at a 70-year high. We are paying more tax than we ever have done before. And I think there's a real issue here about, are we getting value for money? Because we are paying this record tax take. We're being asked for ever more money for the NHS. There is the threat, of course, we have many unions on strike at the moment, that we are going to be asked as taxpayers to fund incredibly large pay increases, especially where inflation is going. But then at the same time, we hear, it's incredibly difficult to get a GP appointment. You can't get an NHS dentist anymore. Obviously, the trains we seem to have a strike at least once a week at the moment. So I think the big issue is we're paying mega money as taxpayers. The private sector is essentially, the public sector cannot exist without the private sector. And how are we ultimately going to get a fair deal for both parties?
Worth saying, of course, that the train sector is kind of a public-private hybrid, isn't it? But I completely take your point, Harry. Helen Thomas, let me put another point to you. A lot of people who, we're reflecting here something that I wrote in my Sunday Telegraph column at the weekend, and a lot of people came back to me and says, "Oh, Liam, you're completely wrong," even though I mentioned it in the column. Public sector workers, public sector pay is on average higher because the public sector disproportionately has lots of professionals, people with degrees, who you'd expect to get higher average pay. I would counter On the other hand, the private sector's got, a small number, but some really high rollers who earn millions and millions of pounds, and that pushes up the average for the private sector. And that, that kind of overstates how private sector people at the bottom end of the income scale are faring. We are going to see a lot of industrial action potentially this autumn involving the public sector. Do you think the public will be broadly sympathetic to striking health workers and, if it happens, teachers?
I think they will, because the thing about inflation, part of why it's so toxic politically, but why it matters here is it affects everybody. It affects everybody. Now, it affects some people more than others, and as we many have talked about, it's those more at the lower income end of things, because more of their money goes on essential goods that have gone up a lot in price.
Food, fuel.
So I think the tricky part of this, and I think when we look into this public versus private sector, frankly, we are all in it together, and it's pretty awful for everybody. Having said that, you pull out some key points there about, well, what is it about the jobs? How do we make some of these value for money? How do we say, OK, well, you're getting a lot more holidays, and look at the pensions that you're getting?
Oh, the public sector pensions are...
Oh, well, we could talk about that for hours, couldn't we?
The cost to everybody else of these massively generous final salary pension schemes, and these civil servants have the most generous public sector pension schemes, which I guess is why they haven't reformed them.
Well,
now, come on, this really grates on people, doesn't it? Because private sector people are paying for those public sector pensions.
Yeah, and we all should the government should do more to look at this, because that clearly is something that understandably really irritates people, and even more so at a time like this, when some people are going to get much bigger salary increases than other people.
They are. Harry Fone, let's come back to you. Let me put this to you, Harry. You are a very acute observer of British politics. All the lads and lasses at Taxpayers Alliance are, I reckon, this autumn and winter, I think the public sector bosses are really going to turn the screw. I think they're going to want to test an incoming Tory Prime Minister. I think there are going to be some serious public sector strikes, and I think there could even be a fully blown political crisis. What say you?
Yeah, I think you could be absolutely right. I mean, of course, all of this really is being fueled by the inflation, which we've heard today. I think it was Citigroup saying they expect it could go to 18.6%, which is just quite frankly incredible. And it's quite natural that workers, be they public sector or private sector, would like to see their wages increase by at least the same amount of that inflation, because if it doesn't, they are seeing, a real terms decrease in their wages. It's worth saying that the public sector workers, I think about 50% of them are unionized compared to the private sector, which is about 15% or something like that. So they do hold quite a lot of power, basically. And, we may even be heading back to the 1970s where, such groups were able to essentially hold the country to ransom. But let's hope for better things. I'm an optimist at heart.
Well, me too, Harry, and let's indeed hope for better things. Harry Fone, campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Great to have you with us on The Money. And indeed, Helen Thomas, as ever, a pleasure, CEO of Blonde Money, and we'll see you again very soon. Now, lots of you have been emailing in on the docker strike. Barry says the average worker at Felixstowe gets approximately £43,000. Correct, Barry. They want wage rises in line with inflation, and we could be facing up to 18% inflation next year. But will they accept a pay cut if we also see deflation, that's when prices go down, after energy prices fade away? An interesting point. Alex emailed to say, not many people want to tell the public what dockers really earn. Over the years, the docks were a closed shop. And unless you had family workers working there already, you had no chance of getting a job with them. They were well known as being high-paid jobs, and they still are. Peter emailed us to say striking dockers should look at container bases around the world. They're now fully automated without many members of staff required. Striking now may affect their long-term employment. Not much support there for striking dockers. So email us if you agree with the dockers taking this industrial action. It's going to last for another 7 days at least, and we'll continue to cover it here on The Money. And keep your emails coming. Tell me what you want to be discussed on the show. Now, it's time for Startup Britain. That's On The Money's regular slot featuring some of the UK's most successful and interesting startups. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ian Huntingdon. He's Managing Director at Spartan Survival, an award-winning British startup, providing authentic bushcraft and survival training courses from Cheshire to Scotland. Spartan Survival was set up with the aim to host live, on-the-ground adventure experience for families, schools and even companies, with a number of business leaders encouraged to ditch their phones and other gizmos and embrace life in the great outdoors. With a background in the British Army, serving as elite military personnel and years of experience working in security, Ian has adapted his survival skills to design courses located in some of the most hostile and austere environments in Britain. And Spartan also offers courses for soldiers suffering from PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, given the mental health benefits of life outdoors. So here he is, not up a mountain for once, but live in the On The Money studio, Ian Huntingdon, my latest guest on Startup Britain. Ian, great to have you in the studio. I've been looking forward to meeting you. So if I was to come on one of your extreme Spartan survival courses, what could I expect? Where would I clean my teeth?
We've got various courses. We start with a level 1 bushcraft course, which is a 2-day, 1-night, fairly sedentary learning skills. Tier 2, we go on to something a little bit harder. And then we go to the survival in the Scottish Highland.
Wow.
And nobody knows where it is.
Wow.
So you sign up for the course, you meet at an RV rendezvous point, and then I take you to the island, you signed an NDA, I take your phone.
A non-disclosure agreement?
Yeah, non-disclosure.
Sign away all your legal rights. I can't sue you for maltreatment.
I take your phone off you and I take your watch off you.
And how long can those courses last?
They're for 7 days. I teach you.
Well, if I can escape the On The Money studio, I really want to do one of those courses. It sounds unbelievable.
You can come with me for 7 days, no problem.
And what do you eat?
Whatever you forage and whatever you catch. So you're given a small fishing kit. I give you a lot of survival equipment, a lot of skills over the first 2 days.
Yeah.
And then the next 5 days, you're left on your own with a tracker, with an SOS button on it. So if you get a bit nervous, give it a press, and one of the instructors will be there within a short period of time to assess the situation. And
what time of year are we talking about? The height of summer, I hope.
All year. You can't just pick when you can survive. It's all year.
Now, you've obviously had a pretty serious and distinguished background in the British military. I'm not allowed to ask you about that, and I won't. But tell me about your thought processes as you moved into the private sector, when you thought about what you wanted to do. A lot of people who come out of the military, do a wide range of courses. A lot of my friends, they've gone on to work in the city or set up their own companies, doing something completely different. But you've really sort of directly adapted, obviously, the world-class basic skills survival training that you got with Her Majesty's Armed Forces.
Well, I left the forces in 2000, so for 20 years I've been on the private sector as a private military contractor and bodyguard, working in sort of every war zone, conflict area, hostile environment for the last 20 years. So I've had to adapt those skills to various environments that can be cold, it can be hot, it can be... sometimes you get lots of accessibility to various things. Sometimes you don't. So sometimes you're washing your face in sand, sometimes you're in a 5-star hotel. So it varies, but we adapted those. A friend came to me and said, I want to do a survival course. My son wants to do a survival course. Yeah. So we took the family away. We did a bushcraft course in a British wood, and they enjoyed it. We then developed the company from there, which was May 2021. So it was just like everybody was coming out of lockdown. Nobody spent any great quality time together. Teenagers were in the bedroom playing PlayStation. So we needed to sort of put families together in an outdoor environment, something that was a little bit alien to everybody. So they all pulled together and sort of got quality time together. That evolved into corporations coming to us, and we put team building courses together for corporations, and that's going very, very well at the moment. We've got the survival side, which we run, which we can take people from. We've had people from factory workers to CEOs of techie companies. We've got a clothing line coming on in September for hillswear, technical hillswear. So it's going from strength to strength to strength.
So you could, in theory, Ian, you could place a family, mum, dad and a couple of bolshy kids on a remote Scottish island, pretty much with nothing except a fishing line and a few bits of flint to start a fire, right?
Well, we could.
You want to talk to some reality TV companies? There's a format there. My God, imagine.
Yeah, you'd have thought so, wouldn't you?
But in theory, you could do that.
We could do that, but we start them in a Chester Wood start.
Yeah.
So we start them in the northwest, in Cholmondeley Castle. We've got 200 acres of woodland there. So we start them there, and then we progress.
Do you personally like all this stuff? Do you like building bivouacs? Do you like starting fires with, rubbing two Boy Scouts together, or whatever, in the old-fashioned phrase? Do you enjoy that kind of really elemental... I mean, it's one thing to put a nice boots and stuff on and with a compass, walk the Pennine Way or something, that's outdoors. But this goes beyond the outdoors, doesn't it? This is kind of a psychological battle as well as a battle against the elements.
Yes, it does. It sort of restarts your whole system because we don't have any phones on our courses. Because what we don't want is people stood there doing this and not paying attention. And we teach them skills that have been lost. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to go into the woods and, when it was time to go home because the street lights started coming on. Yeah. Nowadays, it's a case of everybody's into the technology and it's very much a techie world. And we get away from that. And it teaches sort of kids and parents good life skills.
We're about to go into, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It could yet get a lot worse. When you and I were kids, of course, inflation was high and there were issues about, access to basic food and clothing without wishing to be alarmist. Are we softer now? Have we softened in the last 30, 40 years?
Massively softened.
And what are the dangers of that?
The dangers are we just forget where things come from. We just forget that, I've had kids come on the course and they sort of go, oh, where's the showers? Where's the running water?
Yeah. Where do I plug in my phone as you whip their phone off
my
them?
bed?
Yeah.
So we're massively softer than we used to be.
And what are the dangers of that briefly for society if people are soft?
Well, when everything's going great, nothing. It's great. But if things turn... you've only got to look at Ukraine and what's happening there. You've got to be able to use life skills you've learned in various different... you can't be soft in areas like that. And, it's just skills that have been forgotten. Foraging, fire starting, the sort of priority.
Keeping your head when things are going badly. Resilience, right?
Priorities of survival we teach is one of the first things which people don't seem to... They just think it's, I need to get water. Well, it's not. It's sort of shelter to start with.
Well, it's a fascinating business, Spartan Survival. Ian Hutchinson, it's great to meet you. I do want to come on one of your courses.
You definitely will.
As and when I escape the studio.
Thank you,
Ian,
cheers.
Great to talk to you. Now, that's all we've got time for today, but join me tomorrow for On the Money at 1 p.m. I'll be continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis and helping you to beat the squeeze. Thanks for your company today. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. It's a bit of a messy situation with the weather at the moment. It's quite a lot of cloud around. Some rain and drizzle in places, but it's quite warm and humid, and that's because these weather fronts are drifting in from the Atlantic. Low pressure is nearby and bringing with them a lot of warmth, a lot of humidity, and quite a lot of cloud. Having said that, we started the day with a fair bit of sunshine over the east. Many eastern parts of England will stay generally dry and bright, just the cloud increasing. Further west, we've got some heavier rain through Wales, and we could see some heavy showers developing over the Midlands, parts of northwest England through the afternoon. Not a great deal of rain across the southeast. Some patchy rain getting into southern Scotland, much of northern Scotland staying dry. It is quite warm, temperature in the teens across northern Scotland, but elsewhere getting into the low to mid-20s. We'll see a bit more of that showery rain working across into northeast England, Lincolnshire and eastern parts of Scotland through the evening. Further west, it does become a little bit drier with clearer spells, but it will still be quite a warm night. Certainly a warmer night than last night across much of Scotland, with temperatures holding up in towns and cities in the mid-teens. So again, that warm, that humid feel as we head into tomorrow. Again, a bit of a messy picture with a fair bit of cloud around, but some sunny spells over the Midlands, eastern England, northeast Scotland, but quite a bit more cloud further west. Northern Ireland may brighten up at times, but Wales and southwest England looking likely to see some further heavy showers developing by the afternoon. They'll be hit and miss, however, and in the brighter spells, again, feeling quite warm temperatures in the southeast with a bit of sunshine. Could get into the high 20s for a time. The likelihood of a few more of those heavy showers across parts of the Midlands, South Wales, spreading into northern England during Tuesday evening, and further wet weather could come into the southwest as we head into Wednesday. It is all very messy through the rest of this week with some showers around, but still some warm sunshine across the southeast, looking a little drier as we head towards the weekend.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, man.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Chris Hope, the Daily Telegraph's associate political editor, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. Growing fears that the energy crisis could see businesses closing down. UK industry is braced for a bleak winter as soaring energy costs threaten company closures, putting thousands of jobs at risk. Plus, Brits are being told to avoid certain beaches after new figures reveal a huge increase in raw sewage being dumped into UK seas and rivers. And criminal barristers in England and Wales vote to go on indefinite strike in September. What might that mean for the justice system? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to get off your chest? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. First, though, it's time for a catch-up with the headlines.
Alex, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Bethany Elsey here to bring you up to date on GB News. Criminal barristers in England and Wales will stage an indefinite and uninterrupted strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association have already been walking out in alternate weeks in a dispute with the government over jobs, pay and legal aid funding. The new and all-out industrial action will start from the 5th of September. The Ministry of Justice says more than 6,000 court hearings have been disrupted so far. The Labour leader is calling on the next Prime Minister to make insulating homes a national mission amid soaring energy bills. Sir Keir Starmer has set out plans to upgrade 19 million homes over the next decade. The party says their heat-saving project would save households £11 billion over 3 years. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has criticised Liz Truss, claiming her plans to tackle the cost of living crisis could plunge the economy into an inflation spiral. Ms Truss argues her plans will help the UK economy, but Sir Keir Starmer is urging the leadership candidates to recall Parliament to tackle the crisis.
Unless action is taken, energy bills are going to go through the roof this winter, which is why we, the Labour Party, have said we should freeze energy prices, not let those bills go up, and pay for that in part with the windfall tax on oil and gas companies are making huge profits. Alongside that, we need a national mission to insulate homes. That's a longer-term issue. I called for that a year ago now. If the government had done that, we'd have the best part of 2 million homes insulated. This morning I've been seeing next-generation homes with insulation built into them. So we need to freeze prices for this winter.
Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded not guilty to a charge of fraud. He's accused of allegedly failing to declare £400 million of overseas assets to the government between 2013 and 2016. The 91-year-old made his first appearance at Westminster Magistrates Court earlier this morning after being charged last month. An 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port, Felixstowe, has entered its second day. Almost 2,000 members of Unite, including crane drivers and machine operators, are walking out in a dispute over pay. It's the first strike to disrupt the port since 1989. Well, National Officer for Docks at Unite the Union, Robert Morton, says members want a pay increase that's relative to the company's earnings.
I don't accept that it's the unions that are inflating the profits. I accept that it's the employers that are doing that by making these profits, and good luck to them. But why not share them? Our members of Unite are so angry that they are saying enough is enough. We got you through the pandemic. This is the way you treat us now. And you should be offering an increase that is relative to the company's profits.
Downing Street says the failure of water companies to adequately reduce sewage discharges is completely unacceptable. A Number 10 spokesperson says water firms have a duty to put their customers before shareholders and that they expect urgent action or face fines. It has Environment Agency data obtained by the Liberal Democrat Party shows monitors that are used for tracking sewage being pumped into the sea are faulty or not even installed. Russia is accusing Ukraine of assassinating the daughter of one of President Vladimir Putin's top supporters. Russia's Internal Security Service, the FSB, claims a Ukrainian citizen who arrived in the country in July was behind the attack on Saturday night. Officers allege the suspect fled Russia into Estonia after Daira Dugina was killed in a car bomb on a road outside Moscow. Ukraine has denied any involvement. The allegations have not yet been independently verified. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing a terrorism charge over a political speech he gave at the weekend. He's accused of threatening government officials about the alleged police torture of one of his aides. Hundreds of his supporters have gathered outside his home in the capital, Islamabad. And bosses at Cineworld are considering whether to put the firm into bankruptcy. Earlier this morning, they confirmed they're looking at options for the business, which is struggling under heavy debts. Theatres around the world will remain open as usual for now. This is GB News. We're bringing more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alex.
Well, the headlines could hardly be more stark. And yet, most of the government is still AWOL. Inflation could be set to soar to almost 19%, and companies forced to close when the energy price cap is lifted in October. There are even fears the average household could be paying £6,000 a year come April. But what's being done? Not a single move has been made to drill for North Sea gas or cap its prices to not be dragged into the same astronomical increases across the globe. Nobody seems to have gone cap in hand to Oslo, where we buy most of our energy, to negotiate a better deal. The geological survey commissioned on fracking back in April hasn't translated into action. And scoff as we may at the EU's reliance on Russian gas, at least they have a plan to allow governments to step in to help deal with severe shortages and spiralling prices. But it seems we're being run by a zombie government. Meanwhile, the ongoing political turmoil is straining confidence in our currency, seeing our petrol prices stay sky high. Don't let them tell you it's all Putin's fault. There's a lot more government could and should do. And with the latest decision on the price cap due by the end of this week, we need leadership now. So as Boris bronzes his moobs and Truss and Sunak play school debating society, for businesses and households up and down the country, every second wasted is one step closer to a crisis, the likes of which this country hasn't seen in decades. Well, let's first speak with Arjan Gavecki, who's the director of the Energy Intensive Users Group, an organisation which represents the interests of energy-intensive industrial consumers. Arjan, I mean, the amount that energy is costing now and that it's going to go up to, are you expecting mass closures in your sector and among the people that you represent?